Hi, my name is Audrey Wozniak, and I'm a current PhD candidate in ethnomusicology at Harvard University. I'm very excited to be joining as the British Institute at Ankara and Koç University ANAMED Joint Fellow in Heritage Studies. I'm a musician and scholar by training, and see both my academic research and my experience as an active professional violinist as key components to my approach as an ethnomusicologist. As a fellow of the Thomas J. Watson Foundation in 2014, after my graduation from Wellesley College, I spent a year studying musical manifestations of multiculturalism in China, Indonesia, and Turkey. After my initial exposure to the Turkish classical music tradition in Istanbul 6 years ago, I moved to London to complete a master's degree in politics and communication at the London School of Economics, followed by a master's degree in violin performance from Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance. During my time in the UK, I was eager to continue learning about Turkish classical music and took every opportunity I had to travel back to Istanbul to continue working with musical masters there. I also began participating in Turkish classical music choirs in the Turkish diaspora in London. These experiences became the seeds of my current dissertation project entitled A Discipline for the Nation: Turkish Classical Music Choirs in History and Practice. Although Turkish classical music is an art form claiming over 1,000 years of history and roots in the Byzantine and Ottoman empires, the introduction of a choir as an ensemble format marked a radical reimagination of Turkish social and cultural life in the early 20th century. The choir's introduction occurred with the establishment of the Turkish Republic in 1923, in tandem with a series of social and cultural reforms aimed at a kind of modernizing self-westernization. Today, Turkish classical music choirs are ubiquitous in urban centers of Turkey, as well as in Turkish diasporic populations around the world. My research examines historical and present contestations of Turkish identity through the emergence of state-run and amateur Turkish classical music choirs since the Turkish Republic's foundation. My research is the first to center Turkish classical music choirs as sites for exploring the constructions of Turkishness, treating choirs as social microcosms in which contestations and anxieties about political, cultural, and social values play out through webs of material, discursive, and affective interactions. How have Turkish classical music choirs emerged as ubiquitous sites of music making in Turkey and its diaspora since the Republic's founding? This is a central question I seek to answer in my research. The Ottoman-era musical tradition from which Turkish classical music emerged featured various forms of group singing practices, including mixed ensembles of singers and instrumentalists in the courts, and devotional singing in mosques and Sufi lodges. However, the choir as an ensemble format took inspiration from Western art music practices, and for the first time featured a conductor directing the musical delivery of a group of singers and instrumentalists. Many musicians and scholars of Turkish classical music have offered scathing critiques of this notably foreign addition to Turkish classical music practice, both at the time of its initial introduction and today. Yet state-funded and amateur choirs have become predominant institutions for Turkish classical music presentation and transmission. Using archival and ethnographic methods, I traced the rise of state and amateur Turkish classical music choirs, investigating how discipline has become a primary concern in both music making and Turkish civil society more broadly. Terms such as professional and state musician, in opposition to amateur musician, did not exist at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, these terms are titles which carry status and are used to validate a musician's authority to transmit Turkish classical music. I assert that the historical and current practices of Turkish classical music choirs reveal the ways in which discipline has shaped negotiations of ethnicity, religiosity, gender roles, and globalization in Turkish society. I furthermore strive to demonstrate how gender roles are marked in Turkish classical music choirs, paying particular attention to how these choirs reproduce gender divisions in Turkish society. I also argue that these choirs create spaces which confound public-private distinctions and provide new routes of agency and even healing for participants. Considering the self-fashioning of male choir leaders, women's routes to becoming professional musicians, and women's sociality and musical engagement in amateur choirs, suggests present-day Turkish classical music-making practices remain highly gendered and reinforce the gendering of other social spaces, even as those spaces have seemingly become more public. On the other hand, the organizational structure and rehearsal practices of amateur choirs empower women to exercise agency in ways that many Turkish political and religious institutions occlude, including those which appear to be relatively more liberal. Additionally, through considering the establishment of amateur Turkish classical music choirs in diaspora, the ways in which the musical practices of these choirs sustain members' cultural ties to Turkey, and the relationships between Turkish classical musicians in Turkey and members of diasporic amateur choirs, I aim to contextualize a current widespread affect of despondency, particularly among Turkish youth. I contend that examining musicians' desire to exit Turkey both temporarily and permanently sheds light on the conditions which perpetuate the current pervasive sense of hopelessness and claustrophobia in the country. As an ethnomusicologist, I ask questions about musicians' routes into and their perceptions of the choirs in which they participate, the economic and social structures of those musical ensembles, and how their music making accords with their political, social, moral, and cultural values. Additionally, I listen for how notions of language, music, voice, and sound are produced in the archive, and pay attention to the contestations and anxieties reanimated through silences and absences in the historical record. My positionality as a professional violinist and amateur singer affords me greater knowledge of the music at the center of my research, and greater credibility with and access to my interlocutors than I would have as a mere researcher. I have been able to work closely with a number of professional and highly esteemed musical masters, including many affiliated with Turkish National Radio and Television choirs and the Ministry of Culture Turkish State Music Choir, on account of my proficiency as a violinist. This positionality also enables me to draw phenomenological insights from playing and performing alongside the musicians with whom I have built relationships. Through this research, I seek to illustrate this new direction in Turkish music making, while contextualizing how contestations of social and political values emerge in material relations and embodied practices. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to connecting with you.